Hello and welcome. You're watching a very special broadcast this evening. I'm Sumita Kari. Now, as the world awaits US Fed's decision, we have with us Swaminathan Aiyar to discuss it with us and what it really means for the global economy, especially India. Also, with less than 2 months to go for US elections, we'll also try and address the race to the White House and the implications of that move on global economy, including India. And what could a possibility of a Trump's second term mean for US-India ties? And closer home, we'll also be taking a step closer to One Nation, One Poll and upcoming state elections. Swaminathan Aiyar, consulting editor, ET Now, is now joining us. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us on this special broadcast. We really do appreciate the time that you're taking out tonight for ET Now. I want to first understand from you, we're speaking even as Republican candidate Donald Trump commented on India being a very big abuser of the India-US trade relationship. Now, anybody who's followed Trump knows, and as one expert even told us, that he's addicted to tariffs. So what could a Trump presidency mean for trade between the two countries?
Trump does not seem to know what he's going to say tomorrow or day after. He has constantly contradicted himself and gone back on himself. But broadly speaking, it would appear that he will go for very high protectionism. He does not want to see more Indian software people coming to the USA beyond a point, although he's going to crack down on Indian and other illegals crossing from the Mexican border. But the main thing is that he's going to be putting up these high tariff barriers all over, not just against China, against everybody, including India. When that happens, Europe will retaliate, Japan will retaliate, India will retaliate. And to that, maybe Mr. Trump will retaliate once again with even higher things, even more non-tariff barriers. So there is if Mr. Trump comes back to power, there is a very worrying spectacle of trade wars, which will hurt everybody. It will not produce a large number of jobs for Mr. Trump, as he seems to think. For instance, on steel, modern steel plant can be run by 2,000 people. You don't employ 20,000 or even 60,000 as Tata Steel used to at one point of time. So as I said, the main problem on our economic side would be there would be a possibility of very severe trade wars with retaliations taking place on both sides. On the other hand, if you look at Mr. Trump is again wanting to disengage. He doesn't want wars, any kind of wars or anything on the outside the USA. He's isolationist. If he's isolationist, in effect, it's a signal to China. Why don't you go ahead? You might never again get such an isolationist president. And if then that's an invitation for China to attack Taiwan, that gets even worse. I mean, Mr. Xi might well say, I might never again get a president so reluctant to intervene in Taiwan. So as I said, Mr. Trump's isolationism and high protectionism are both very worrying for India. So I do hope Kamala Harris wins.
Okay, sir. And these are indeed, like you said, that this could unleash a bevy of trade wars across the globe. Tariffs and retaliatory tariffs could be seen. But, sir, he's also stated, and I quote, that tariffs he will impose by 100% if nations decide to move towards de-dollarization. Now, de-dollarization, he said, would be, equivalent to losing a war and that US cannot really lose its dollar standard. Now, you'd know that India and other BRICS nations have discussed about this move. India also has a direct rupee trade now with UAE. So then how does this challenge play out? And is de-dollarization a serious concern for the US economy as is being made out?
I do not think there's any chance of de-dollarization in terms of its dominance in trade. There are very good reasons why it has been dominant for the last 75 years. There is no reason for that to go. I mean, there are countries like China, for instance, the yuan. Certainly, China has come up in a big way. So it has become a reserve currency. And yet you ask me, of all the leading nations, what percentage of their currencies are in yuan? You will find that the IMF weighting formula, I think, was for 50% dollar. or 60%. There is no reason for it to come down. If you say who will take its place, the Chinese currency, British currency, Japanese, not a chance. So as I said, de-dollarization is not on the agenda in the sense of countries not using the dollar. Some minor alternatives are being discussed like rupee trade or yuan trade. Believe me, none of this is more than a scratch or a fiddle. Fundamentally, we are still very much there. As far as the use of cryptocurrencies are concerned, there is money laundering, frankly, or crime or drugs. These are the guys who are using cryptocurrencies in place of dollars. And that is an extremely reprehensible thing. And we need to find ways to crack down on that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And now that we're talking about de-dollarization and the United States, let me also ask you about this big story about the US Fed rate cut that is almost certain, 25 bips or 50 bips. That decision will come in later tonight. Do you think India will follow suit? And if yes, how soon, given our economic growth? And how many cuts then could be penciled in so far as the Indian Central Bank is concerned?
Well, we are in a globalized situation where if the United States does not cut its rates, it becomes very difficult for emerging markets to cut their rates, because if they did so, there will be a rush of hard currency out of the emerging markets to the USA. So many people have been saying, why doesn't the Reserve Bank cut? Why doesn't the Reserve Bank cut? If you find that the Fed cuts, you can bet your boots, I would say, that the Reserve Bank will cut it. Not only the Reserve Bank, but there will be various emerging markets across the board that will cut their interest rates. Because, there is a coordination which you cannot get away from in a globalized world.
Okay. Okay, sir. So how many cuts could be penciled in, sir? Especially talking about India.
Well, frankly, Mr. Shaktikanta keeps worrying. I mean, if you ask me, he places far too much emphasis on what the Reserve Bank can or cannot do. If you ask me, monetary policy is more muddling towards a goal than any precision or fine-tuning, which is what Mr. Shaktikanta seems to be aiming at. But as I said, broadly speaking, commodity prices come down. Oil particularly has come down. Some food prices have come down so that, the export of onions has been liberalized. So in these circumstances, I think Mr. Shaktikant Das will cut at least twice if the Fed cuts twice.
Okay. Okay, sir. So two rate cuts, the possibility of two rate cuts is what you're hinting at. But let me also get in your thoughts on inflation. Now, that has been brought under the 4% band. Monsoon has been pretty much according to the projections that were made by IMD. However, there are concerns lingering around inflation. The fact that it has not really ended, the fact that there was base effect at play, given the two wars that are playing out. In fact, many economists who we've spoken to state that in the next few months, inflation is expected to rise. Do you agree with that argument, and why or why not?
I do not think the future is that predictable. There's a very good monsoon. The rains have been very good. So that is a reason for food prices to be under control. If food prices are under control, many other things come under control, because in India, studies show that food inflation leaks into the general inflation. Equally, a negative fall in prices will leak in. The world is having a relatively softening of commodity prices, but above all, of oil and gas. Some other commodities, not so much. In these circumstances, I think, inflation should not be rearing its head. I think the future prospects right now are actually quite decent. Again, if you have the uncertainty of the US economy, or maybe a slowdown in anticipation of a trade war, all of that again would be anti-inflation. So I think that inflation is unlikely to rear its head in the next 3 to 6 months.
All right. So, things seem settled so far as inflation is concerned, is what you're stating, sir. But speaking of India, I mean, 7% or higher growth is being expected out of the country, according to RBI's estimates. In fact, several agencies have also upgraded India's growth projections, and that includes Moody's and IMF, amongst others. So, what do you think is working in India's favor, and how can this growth be sustained over a longer period of time? And, what are the long-term challenges also, if you could speak about with respect to the Indian economy that you foresee?
The main challenges we are going to face is the fragmentation of the global economy. India is more globalized than even China in terms of trade to GDP. I don't think this is well understood. So while Mr. Modi and PLI all looks as though, everything is an internalized thing, the truth is India is a substantially globalized economy. If you further look at the global capability centers which have come up in India without any fanfare, are employing 1.5 million people, maybe 150, 200 billion of revenue. Huge amount of R&D going on out there, world class. So, while there is the global aspect of this, I think, is more important. So the GC, I would say the global capability centers have been the most successful thing that have happened in 10 years of Modi. Modi will not talk about it because he did nothing to create it. It was created by globalization. The global shortage of skills meant that companies the world over came to India because India is one of the few places that produces maybe 3 million STEM graduates every single year. And to take advantage of this pool of skilled manpower, the world has come here. It is far, far bigger than PLI. Believe me, PLI is nothing compared to the global capability centers. So the globalized India remains globalized. On the services side, therefore, it looks as though we will continue to do well, including global capability centers and service exports. But on the goods exports and goods production, I think the coming trade wars and protectionism will hurt us regardless. The idea that we can just keep growing at 7% in the face of all these global problems, I think would be very optimistic. I would not be surprised to see a slowdown to 6.5 or even 6% average in the next 5 years.
Okay. Okay. So let me also ask for your thoughts on much has been spoken about the potential slowdown or a recession in the United States. I mean, inflation in the country has moderated, retail numbers were decent, but it's the idea of a supersized rate cut which is really stoking fears of a slowdown in the country. Are those fears rational?
Market people are paid to think of the most dramatic and drastic situation. And hence, people are suddenly saying, will there be a huge number of cuts because the US economy is going to be slowing down? In the USA, the Fed is not particularly worried about growth at this point at all. The US economy has outperformed all expectations in 2023, even if there's some slowdown in 2024. The US economy really is in very good shape. The inflation, the unemployment rate, at 4.5% is not the lowest ever, but still very low by global standard. So I don't see any great slump in the USA, and I do not see the Fed slashing rates to combat a slump. So I would say that is alarmism.
Yes, sir. So that's not really something that you are saying will happen. Of course, all eyes are now on that historic rate cut decision that will come after over 4 years. But let's shift our focus to India. Now, so we are speaking on a day when a historic decision has actually been made by the Union Cabinet. In fact, the Cabinet has ratified one nation, one poll. The government's argument is that frequent elections are a burden on the exchequer. There is voter fatigue, and synchronization of elections across the country will ensure economic growth and stability. How exactly do you think economic growth will be ensured, especially when, there are concerns being raised that national issues could take precedence over state issues, and implementation of this idea has really not been figured out yet? If you could weigh in on that as well.
First, I don't think it's going to happen. It will require constitutional amendments, which will not easily go through in the current situation. Secondly, is it desirable or non-desirable? I certainly would agree with Mr. Modi that having elections every 3 months is a terrible thing on decision making. It brings everything down. It's a waste. And some people say too much money is spent on elections. That, to my mind, is peripheral. The main thing is that it slows down decision making all over the place, and that is bad for the economy. To that extent, we have too many elections. So is the answer to have only one? If you have only one election, well, it's not impossible. It's not particularly too drastic, because you can say that if you go back to the 1950s and 60s, we did have simultaneous elections then. However, in the light of what has happened, I would say one nation, two elections would be better than one nation, one election. In other words, I would like central elections every 5 years and state elections halfway through. After 2.5 years after the central election, you should have the state election. The local elections, municipal panchayat, that can be with the central election, because frankly, it's not influenced by that. So I would say one nation, two elections would be much better than one nation, one election. Yes. But as I said, I don't think it's going to happen, because the changes, the constitutional issues involved are very different.
So, sir, the government, when you say that this is not an idea that can be implemented in practice, we were also speaking with the, former election commissioner of India as well. One of them, he stated that, of course, like you rightly stating, that 5 articles of constitutional amendments will need to be made. All the parties will need to be on the same page as well for this bill to get passed in the parliament. Help us understand, if this indeed gets passed, what will it really mean for businesses?
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.